The war of words between the U.S. and North Korea escalates as the world learns about North Korea's nuclear capability. Cato Institute foreign policy expert Doug BANDOW discusses the threat and the path forward. And with football season about to get underway, just how dangerous are contact sports? The man who discovered the brain disease afflicting NFL players and author of the new book, Truth Doesn't Have a Side, Dr. BENNET OMALU, is here with a stark warning. And finally, the biggest mistake parents make getting their kids off to college and what you should be doing. Educational consultant Daniel RISEMAN will offer some guidance. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Doug BANDOW, Dr. BENNET OMALU, and Daniel RISEMAN are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. You know how to do it. I'm at Raymond Arroyo, and I'll be live tweeting throughout the show. Or you can email us at worldover@EWTN.com. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. It was another week of escalating war rhetoric after the United Nations slapped tough new sanctions on North Korea. The rogue nation vowed to bolster its nuclear arsenal, unveiled plans to fire 4 test missiles toward Guam, and gain a, quote, 1,000-fold revenge against the United States. The tough talk came after the UN Security Council unanimously approved sanctions, including an exports ban worth over $1 billion. Pyongyang called the move a violent infringement of its sovereignty. As reports surfaced Tuesday that North Korea may have successfully produced a miniaturized nuclear warhead, President Donald Trump boasted of America's own nuclear arsenal and warned the communist dictatorship to not make any more threats to the United States or face annihilation. After North Korea dismissed that comment, Trump on Thursday responded like this.
They've been doing this to our country for a long time, for many years. And it's about time that somebody stuck up for the people of this country and for the people of other countries. So, if anything, maybe that statement wasn't tough enough.
Trump added that North Korea better get their act together or face extraordinary trouble. More on this in our next segment. And most of the world's attention has been on North Korea, while the Middle East's aspiring nuclear power, Iran, is dismissing a U.S. push to inspect its military sites. In a bid to test the nuclear deal that Tehran struck with the world's powers and the Obama administration in 2015, the Trump administration has been pushing for inspections of suspicious sites. However, on Monday, a spokesman for the Islamic Republic mocked the U.S. request, saying to reporters the request was a dream that will never come true and possibly the work of a satirist. The inspections are one element of the Trump administration's strategy to be more aggressive in preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. This past week, the president signed new sanctions against Iran for its ballistic missile program, human rights abuses, and support of international terrorism. And South America's defiant rogue leader is moving ahead with his power grab amid criticism domestically and abroad. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's newly created Constituent Assembly took office this week. Their job? Rewriting Venezuela's constitution, and thereby enabling Maduro to solidify his power. The assembly declared itself all-powerful this week and literally took seats in the chamber where the opposition-controlled Congress of Venezuela normally meets. The U.S. imposed new sanctions against the Maduro government on Thursday. The vice president of the Venezuelan Bishops' Conference denounced what he called the voracious corruption of the Maduro regime and called for a total change of government through general elections. Back here in the U.S., the city of Chicago is taking the Trump administration to court over its immigration policies, Democrat Mayor Rahm Emanuel announced Monday that Chicago is suing over what many U.S. cities argue are illegal bids to withhold public safety grants from so-called sanctuary cities. Attorney General Jeff Sessions responded to the announcement, saying the administration, quote, will not simply give away grant dollars to city governments that proudly violate the rule of law and protect criminal aliens at the expense of public safety. Emanuel said his city won't be blackmailed into changing its values as a city welcoming immigrants. An estimated 300 U.S. jurisdictions, including cities and counties, have sanctuary policies for illegal immigrants. And in Nigeria, at least 12 people are dead and others critically wounded. It happened when a gunman attacked a church in southeastern Nigeria. Although Boko Haram has attacked hundreds of churches during the past decade, authorities believe this shooting was related to organized crime and a drug war. Police said gunmen entered St. Philip Church during Mass early Sunday and went to the front of the church and opened fire. Another assailant blocked an exit door as worshipers scattered. One of those killed was the father of a local magnate who financed the building of the church. The magnate was apparently the target of the gunman. Pope Francis deplored the attack during his Wednesday audience, singling out those who perpetuate violence on places of worship where the faithful gather to pray. And the long-discussed accord between the Holy See and Beijing on the appointment of bishops in China is apparently already in place. This according to Vatican Bishop Marcelo Sanchez Sorando. He told a Chinese state-run media outlet this past week that although the Holy See has been unable to reach a formal agreement with the Chinese government, an unspoken agreement for the appointment of Catholic bishops is, quote, the real thing. Bishop Sorando, the Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, went on to say the real thing is that at this moment, China and the Pope have a very good relation. The communist regime insists that bishops in China must be chosen by the government-backed Catholic Patriotic Association and not the Pope. In practice, many Chinese bishops are recognized by both the Vatican and Beijing, but bishops who openly resist the Patriotic Association remain subject to government harassment and persecution. The Vatican did recently express grave concerns over Bishop Peter Shao Zhimin. He was seized by authorities in May. His whereabouts are still unknown. And in spite of the recent liberation of Mosul, the Christian presence in Iraq has continued to decline. According to a recent report, the Vatican has ordered the closure of 8 churches in Baghdad. International Christian Concern, an organization that advocates on behalf of persecuted Christians, says the churches were closed in May after nearly 7 years of low or no attendance. Catholics fled Iraq since the beginning of the Iraqi war more than a decade ago. And Pope Francis has ordered the Belgian Catholic hospital system to stop offering euthanasia to its patients. The Brothers of Charity, who operate 15 hospitals in Belgium, disclosed earlier this year that they would begin to offer euthanasia as an option to patients. The Pope has given the religious order until the end of August to end that policy or face canonical discipline, including the removal of the hospital's Catholic identity. The Vatican also instructed all members of the Brothers of Charity who serve on the hospital boards to provide a written assurance that they accept the Church's teaching that human life must be respected and protected in absolute terms from the moment of conception until its natural end. And finally, in the Holy Land, after a decades-long search, archaeologists north of the Sea of Galilee believe they have found the native village of 3 apostles. Excavators have uncovered the remains or ruins of the lost Roman city of Julius, which existed between the 1st and 3rd century A.D. During the time of Christ, it was the village of Bethsaida, which is described in the New Testament as the home to the apostles Peter, Andrew, and Philip. Discovered Roman-era pottery, bronze, and coins dating to the Emperor Nero peg the site between AD 65 and 85 AD. This was the setting for many of Jesus' miracles in the Gospel of St. Mark. Jesus heals a blind man there. It's also near the site where he multiplied the fishes and the loaves. When we return, the war of words between the U.S. and North Korea continues to escalate. How much of a threat is North Korea? And what is the path forward? Foreign policy expert Doug BANDOW will join us when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
Welcome back to The World Over. Tensions between the United States and North Korea seem to be growing at an all-time high. What is North Korea's nuclear capability? How much of a threat is it to the United States? And how do we deal with Pyongyang now and moving forward? Joining me to discuss this and much more, Senior Fellow and Foreign Policy Expert at the Cato Institute, Doug BANDOW. Doug, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
Let's begin with what we heard there. We now have General Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, who issued his own statement. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he basically says the North Koreans must choose to stop isolating itself and stand down in pursuit of nuclear weapons. The DPRK should cease any consideration of actions that would lead to the end of its regime and the destruction of its people. Does this rhetoric concern you?
Well, I don't think we're gaining by ramping up the tensions. I mean, Mattis's statement at least is directed at kind of deterrence. Don't do something really stupid.
Yeah.
You know, the president's response sounded an awful lot like Kim Jong-un. My reaction is, you know, the United States is the premier power on earth. We don't have to play that rhetoric. Kim Jong-un is acting out of weakness. We're acting out of strength.
What do you make of the North Korean threat? They claim they have missiles that they're going to drop into the waters near Guam as a show of force. Do you believe them?
Well, they have a missile that could reach Guam. They're not going to bomb Guam because they know we'd bomb them back and destroy them. Now, we think they have maybe 20 nuclear warheads. And we can kind of measure the material they have. We don't know exactly what they've done with it. You know, CIA now thinks maybe they've miniaturized warheads. But we don't think they have a missile that actually could target the U.S., bring a warhead over and hit the U.S. We're talking about a very limited capability. America has 1,400 nuclear weapons. We have the best, nuclear force on Earth, premier military on Earth. The North Koreans are out of weakness. I mean, they really are scared of America.
What do you make of the reports we've been seeing? I mean, CNN had I was laughing at the report. They did a live report from Hawaii with a man named Mr. Miyagi, who is the safety czar, who rings the alarm and sounds the bells when, they're under attack. And they were saying, it could hit here in 10 minutes, and we'd only have 15 minutes to react. Now they're talking about Denver and L.A., and they're showing the time it would take the missiles to land. How reality-based is any of this reporting?
Well, this is all very silly. I mean, the reality is the North Koreans, I tell people, they're evil, but they're not suicidal. I mean, Kim Jong-un wants his virgins in this world, not the next. These are not people who are going to intentionally blow themselves up. And that's, of course, what would happen if they attacked America.
Yeah. What
they're trying to do is keep us away from them. They've watched Libya, they've watched Iraq, they've watched Afghanistan. And Libya is a case where, the dictator gave up his nukes and he gave up his missiles.
Gaddafi.
And a few years later, the U.S. and Europeans said, too bad, out you go. And they cite his case. I mean, they're quite aware of that.
Yeah. Now, you were just there not long ago. They have deep and systemic internal problems within North Korea. Tell us some of those and why that may also be a check on whatever ambitions they have of, taking over the globe or attacking a much bigger opponent.
Well, this is a desperately poor country. South Korea alone has about 40 times the GDP, has twice the population, is raced ahead of the North. The countryside is very poor. There's a bit more money in the capital. But this country in no way matches the U.S. or any of its allies. It's a very political place. So they're trying to open up the economy a little, but it's very hard to do that. Very rigid politically, everything under who they call the supreme leader. The father and grandfathers, images appear and statues all over. It's a very regimented place. Very, very difficult to see them kind of competing successfully in the world today. And they focus on this nationalism to try to preserve the regime.
Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, has issued a statement saying, look, Washington is not your enemy, North Korea, and we don't seek regime change. How do you think that's accepted and heard in North Korea by Kim Jong-un?
It's a good message, but there's no reason for them to believe it in the sense that, number one is, what does President Trump think? Whatever Rex Tillerson might say, if you look at President Trump's rhetoric. And then from their standpoint, what will the next administration do? I mean, this administration could change its mind. The next administration, again, you go back to Libya. President Bush made a deal with the Libyans and kept it. Yeah. President Obama comes along and says, here's our great opportunity. The North views itself as alone. It knows that the Chinese will not save them. The Russians won't save them. If they're in a war, they're gone. So we have to try to deal with a situation where they feel pressured and threatened. And the question is, how do you try to come up with some solution where they believe that?
Well, for 64 years, we've invested a lot of blood and time preserving peace in that region, and we have men in harm's way right now, and women. Your thoughts about the Chinese involvement in all of this? There are some who say the Chinese have a lot to gain here, and that they could even be using North Korea as a pawn, if you will, to provoke the United States, to draw them into some sort of entanglement, whether prolonged or in a short period of time, in that region of the world. Do you think there's credibility there?
Well, I think the Chinese have a number of interests there. They don't like instability. They really are uncomfortable with the nuclear power potentially bringing America in, causing all of this. On the other hand, they like having a buffer state. They don't want a failed state. They don't want millions of refugees.
Right.
They don't want a reunited Korea allied with America and U.S. troops on the Yalu River. So that's why they're very reluctant to put huge pressure on the North. They don't want it to fall apart. I think there's a deal we could make. U.S. troops come home, they put pressure on the North, but we have to sit down with them and acknowledge they have interests. We can't just tell them what to do. That doesn't work with Beijing.
And you think that's possible, even given the outrageous practices and behavior of Kim Jong-un?
Yeah, now the problem is you put pressure on the North, they might resist. And 500,000 people starved to death in the late 90s and the regime continued.
Right.
We have no easy answer here. But what we've got to do is say preservation of peace is the most important thing. So military option is the very last. It's not the starting point. We have to look at the other options, working with the Chinese, working with the South Koreans, and using diplomacy as well as deterrence. I mean, we have to bring all of these measures to bear.
Do you think Trump was just trying to sort of beat his chest to get their attention?
Well, it's hard to know what President Trump is up to. I think he is an impulsive character. I think he acts out of emotion. He's certainly correct that we need to make clear to the North we will defend ourselves. They wouldn't dare attack. We would respond. But pushing up the rhetoric, that's their game, not ours. We are the superpower. We don't have to do that. They do that because they want to try to convince us they're strong. We don't have to do that. We are strong.
Doug BANDOW, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely.
When we return, football season is nearly upon us, and heartbreaking stories about the effects of brain trauma on players continue to make news. Forensic pathologist and author Dr. BENNET OMALU is here to share disturbing findings and a stark warning for those who might be playing contact sports the world over. Continues in a moment. Stay right there.
The New York Times released a new report on concussions in the NFL. They found that 99% of deceased players who donated their brains to a new study had CTE. It was another piece of evidence that football can be extremely dangerous. This is what has surprised me with this. It's the lack of reaction to this story.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guest is a forensic pathologist and the chief medical examiner for San Joaquin County, California. He's best known for his discovery of CTE, the degenerative brain disease that has afflicted so many in the NFL. And, of course, he was memorialized in the powerful film Concussion, starring Will Smith. He returns to the show to discuss CTE and his new book, Truth Doesn't Have a Side, an alarming discovery about the danger of contact sports. We're pleased to welcome in studio Dr. BENNET OMALU.
Thank you so much.
Doctor, great to have you here and have you back. I want to revisit really what got you into this whole, your life's work, what's become your life's work. You were a medical examiner. You were assigned a case in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
And it is a football player named Mike Webster.
Yes.
You get there and you discover what, and how did it deepen your faith, that moment?
Yeah, but prior to that, I was struggling with depression and very low self-esteem. Mm-hmm. And that morning when I met Mike Webster in death, I saw myself in him. Because if you recall Ephesians chapter 4, we all are one body, one spirit, one hope, bound together by the bond of peace. So we all are members of one another. Whatever I do to you, I do to myself. Whatever I do even to the least of us. Mm-hmm. So I walked up to Mike Webster. I spoke to his spirit, and I said, Mike, I would use my education and knowledge to get to the bottom of this, to get to the truth and vindicate you and your family. So I had no reason to do his autopsy, but the spirit led me to do his autopsy. I opened up his skull, his brain appeared normal, but again, I believe the Holy Spirit led me to fix the brain and examine it. I discovered the changes in his brain. I believed it had been reported before, but all we had in the literature was dementia pugilistica, dementia of boxers.
Right.
There was never a dementia footballistica.
They weren't that specific.
Exactly. So I thought I was being delusional because I knew I was struggling. So I showed it to other doctors. They confirmed it was new, but we shouldn't simply publish it. We should give it a name. So we chose chronic traumatic encephalopathy because it had precedence. It was already existing in the literature, somewhat as an adjective, a descriptive terminology.
CTE.
Yes, because of the Dobbert principle of law, meaning for medical evidence to be used as evidence in a court of law, it needs to have precedence.
Right.
Because we knew it would end up in the court of law, which it did.
Yeah.
So chronic traumatic encephalopathy, we selected that. It sounded intellectually sophisticated with a very good acronym. But I practice my faith in my science and my science in my faith. Why? I discovered my faith through my science because I do autopsies in deceased people. I've done over 12,000 autopsies. And I discovered that science is a human endeavor that searches for the truth. It's in pursuit of the truth through scientific methods and tenets.
Right.
And I discovered that there is a spirit of God that lives in each and every one of us, that one spirit. And identification and manifestation of that spirit of God in you is faith. And that faith seeks the truth through the tenets of faith, including religion. And there is only one truth. That is why the title of my book is Truth Doesn't Have a Side. It doesn't have a perspective or a perspective. There is only one truth. Science and faith end in one common outcome. And guess what that truth is? God. God is truth. God is light.
When you opened Mike Webster's skull, you discovered some protein on it, a collection of proteins. What's the difference between a normal brain and a CTE-afflicted brain?
You know, a CTE-afflicted brain may actually appear normal on CT scans and MRI scans. It may appear normal by naked eye examination. But if you subject it to very sophisticated tissue analysis and examine it under a microscope, you will see some very abnormal proteins. The commonest type you would see is called tau. It's an abnormal protein. And what it does essentially, like Will Smith said in the movie, it strangles the brain cell. And it impairs functioning, the cell-to-cell communication between the brain cells. And it could manifest with a broad variety of symptoms.
ALS-like symptoms?
Sometimes motor symptoms, ALS-like symptoms. It could manifest with cognitive decompensation. You begin to lose your memory. You lose the ability to retain new information. You begin to lose your ability to control yourself. You begin to have anger outbursts.
Wow.
You begin to engage in disinhibition. You're more likely to become a drug addict, more likely to become an alcoholic. You're more likely to develop psychiatric illnesses like major depression.
Yeah. Now, the New York Times had this very dramatic spread where they put brain scans up, and they analyzed 111 former NFL players or current NFL players, I guess former, they're all deceased, and they found 110 of the 111 had CTE symptoms. Surprising to you?
No. About 10 years ago, I actually said it that I believe 100% of professional football players must have a certain type of brain damage to a certain degree, with or without CTE. I must emphasize CTE is the only type of brain damage you suffer if you receive blows to your head. It's just one of many. I believe we're becoming obsessed with CTE. I'm not surprised. In fact, Hippocrates, 400 years before Christ was born, was the first to identify concussions, called it commotio cerebri. So 400 years before Christ was born till today, over the centuries, it has been confirmed by science. And this is not about football or sports. That in whatever human activity you engage in whereby your head is subjected to blows, the more forceful the blow and the more repeated the blows, the greater the risk of developing brain damage and the greater the risk of developing severe brain damage.
Yeah.
There was a study which actually shocked me that came out from Sweden. Two studies in 2014 and 2016. Look at what they did. They followed 1.1 million children who had suffered at least one concussion for 41 years.
Wow.
And they found out that when you suffer at least one concussion, your risk of dying before 42 years old is much greater than that of the general population. And you're more likely to die from violent causes. You have about 2 to 4-fold increased risk of committing suicide. You have about 2 to 4-fold risk of developing major psychiatric illnesses like major depression. You're more likely to drop out of high school. You're more likely to attain low levels of education. You're more likely to become a drug addict and abuse opioids. You're more likely to become an alcoholic. You're more likely to engage in violent behavior and criminal behavior. So it's not just CTE, it's either you have CTE or not. We have always known there is nothing like a safe blow to the human head. The truth is inconvenient.
Yeah.
The truth could be difficult. The truth could be painful sometimes.
Well, at least 14 players during this offseason, young players, 30 and under, have retired from the NFL. And I want to play this for you. Now, this is former Bengals NFL player Boomer Esiason. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he had this to say about his own career on his radio show. Listen.
If I, died tomorrow and my brain basically was taken and researched and I was found to have CTE, which most likely I have, because I think all football players probably have it.
I agree with him.
You agree with him?
Not just me, personal opinion, science. And that is why, Raymond, it has always been my position that no child under the age of 18 in America today should play any of the high-impact, high-contact collision sports.
So high school football, you would say?
No.
No.
College football, NFL should be in place.
Because they're adults and can make their own decisions.
They could play.
But you don't think it's safe for adults either?
It's not safe for adults, but adults have reached the age of consent. They have the freedom, liberty, and free will like we Christians should have to do whatever they want to do, as long as it does not pose any threat to another human being. And I don't just look at it from the perspective of a scientist. I also look at it from the perspective of a Christian. I read my Bible regularly. I came across Matthew chapter 18, where Christ said that children are the most precious in the eyes of God, that their angels behold the face of God. I have 2 kids. I've discovered through my Catholic faith that when you conceive a child, God invites you in to partake in the creation of life. And He gives you a gift of His Spirit, a gift of life in your child. And as the parable of the master and his servants and the talents, it is our duty as Christians to nourish, to cherish, and protect that gift of life He has given us, so that we uphold our children to become whatever God created them to be.
And the gift of the mind that you write about in the book.
Yes. What makes you a human being and distinguishes you from animals is your mind, your intuition, your intelligence. Now, as a parent, would you, given what we know today, intentionally expose your child to harm that would rob your child of his mind, of his intelligence? Is that a Christian thing to do?
What do you say to people who say, wait a minute, we have safer helmets for young players, even in the NFL. They're shocking, they're shock-proof, they take care of the abrasions and bruising. You don't have that with this new brand and the technology we're seeing in helmets.
The helmet industry would be the first to tell you that helmets do not prevent subconcussions and concussions. Helmets actually protect your child from suffering a sudden and unexpected catastrophic death on the field. Helmets will only protect abrasions, lacerations, and contusions of your face and scalp, fractures of your skull, epidural and subdural hemorrhages inside your skull.
But not the brain trauma.
Not the brain from bouncing around inside the skull. No helmet would do that for you. In fact, paradoxically, a helmet may even increase the risk of your child suffering brain damage. Why? A helmet increases the weight of your child's head, increases the size, and will therefore increase the momentum of the impact, and will give your child the impetus to weaponize his head because there's no contact and there's no pain upon contact. So a helmeted head is more likely to receive blows. And some of the newer model helmets coming today, or if your child suffers a concussion, it will alert your child or alert you. What difference does that make? Your child has already suffered the injury. And parents need to know that concussions, subconcussions have no cures. They're permanent injuries.
But you don't even need a concussion to suffer CTE.
You don't need a concussion.
All you need is brain trauma.
Repeated
I might have hurt myself right there. Tell me what the studies are showing us about young people who are playing these high-contact sports.
What the studies are showing us is that children essentially should not play these harmful sports. The brain of a child is fully developed at about 18 to 25 years old. You're born with a certain number of brain cells. You can only lose your brain cells. You can't create new ones. By the age of 2 years old, your brain cells have reached their adult locations. And between 2 and 18, your brain cells are forming very intricate and complex interconnections.
Between 2 and 18?
Billions, between 2 and 18. And then there's myelination. So what I tell people, you think about a skyscraper being built, the foundation. So they're connecting the iron rods to build a strong foundation. So what if a slight earthquake happens? What does it do? It disrupts the interconnected rods. And that skyscraper can never be as strong as it was built to be.
Wow.
That is what happens to your child's brain. So when the brain is developing, it is more vulnerable to shearing forces. And these are permanent, lifetime injuries. The bad thing about CTE really is your child could stop playing when he's 12. 5, 10, 20, sometimes up to 40 years later, he or she may begin to have progressive symptoms, long after he had forgotten that he played. And when people say that, oh, the science is not yet settled, that is not true.
Yeah, the NFL has said, look, These players have such thick necks that protects them from any real injuries that you almost can't have a brain injury.
Thank you for bringing it up. If you notice in my book, I never attacked the NFL.
No, but boy, they attacked you.
Yes, they did. They
came after you fiercely, wanted you to retract that first paper.
Yes, and they accused me of being a criminal. Okay, it is okay, I have forgiven everybody like I should as a follower of Christ. But we shouldn't make it about the NFL. I like the NFL. I know people will be surprised when I see that. The NFL is a corporation. I believe in the free market. I believe corporations should make as much money as possible, should make as much profit as possible. The NFL is there to sell a product, football. The NFL is not there to provide health care or health monitoring to individuals. That is why my focus is on parents. And the question, like I said in my book, each and every parent must answer. Do you love football more than you love God? Do you love football more than you love your child? Because God, the Spirit of God, lives in your child. Do you love football more than you love your child? Like in the movie Concussion, it was said that the NFL now owns a day of the week, a day that was owned by the church. That is actually true.
Yeah, well, now they own Thursday and Monday, too.
Thank you.
It's growing.
In some parts of the country, in some parts of the country, football has risen to the level of a religion.
Yeah, it's a cult. It's its own cult.
And these are questions we Christians, Roman Catholics, Pentecostals, we need to begin to ask ourselves, is it now rising to the level of idolatry? It's in the Bible. You shouldn't place anything above me. Love thy God.
What other sports are you concerned about? Because it's not just football.
Yes, it's not just football. The high-impact, high-contact sports, the big six are football, ice hockey, mixed martial arts, rugby, boxing, wrestling. Now, no child under 18 should play these games. Now, for soccer and lacrosse, again, I do not think any child below the age of 18 should play lacrosse. Lacrosse has the highest concussion rates across all sports.
Wow. No, I know kids have fractured mouths and skulls and everything from lacrosse.
For soccer, one, there should not be any heading below the age of 18 for soccer. Because most times when they go for the ball, head on head, okay? Two, soccer is a high dexterity, high visual spatial sport. You need that neurological capacity to play soccer. Children who are 12 to 14 have not yet developed yet. And so soccer as we play today without heading should be for children above 12, 14. And then beneath that age, we need to develop a less dribble, less contact type of soccer for our children to play. Now, I know these things could be very difficult for many of us, but one thing I would advise people is, in my faith journey, the truth is always inconvenient. The truth is difficult and could be painful sometimes. But we do not ignore or deny the truth because of its inconvenience. Come what may, the truth will prevail.
How did your faith help you weather the attacks from the NFL when they were, you know, they leaned on institutions? You couldn't get anything published?
Yes.
The institution, and let me just paint the full picture here. There's an institute in Boston that you were first affiliated with, now taking credit for discovering your discovery.
And denying my work, even denying that I didn't discover anything.
Yeah.
Okay? Even the National Institute of Health, I was ostracized. If some insinuated I was practicing African voodoo medicine. But remember, I'm a Christian. I'm a Roman Catholic, a proud Roman Catholic. There are 3 passages in the Bible that some may true. The first is Colossians chapter 1. In Colossians chapter 1, it says that Christ is preeminent in all things. He is above every principality, power of rulers of this present age. All things were created in him, for him, by him. Okay? Ephesians chapter 2 and Ephesians chapter 6. It tells us that God is above every principality, or power or ruler of this present age. If I profess Jesus as my Lord and Savior, if I confess that to be my faith, whom shall I fear? He is preeminent. I'm seeking his truth and his light to enhance our common humanity. And if you notice, every Easter I read my Gospels on the crucifixion of Christ. And many Easters ago, I was reading on Resurrection Sunday. So when Mary Magdalene and other women came to the grave, they did not see the body of Christ. They saw the angel. And as they were going back to tell the apostles, Christ appeared to them. What did Christ say to them? Do not be afraid. And the first time Christ appeared to the apostles, what did he say to them? Do not be afraid. So that was what helped me through. I was embedded and firmly grounded in my faith. But in doing so, I had to study the Word of God.
And where is your work now?
I still work for San Joaquin County. I'm employed by the San Joaquin General Hospital.
You're still a medical examiner?
Yes, a medical examiner. I own a private consulting business, so I still can put food on my table because I lost my job in Pittsburgh. And I ran away, ran to the Central Valley of California so that I could be left alone, and I could continue examining brains in my garage. But, you know, when you put your faith in God, it may take a long time to come, but God will never let you down. I guarantee people that.
You said in a recent interview, you believe O.J. Simpson probably suffered from CTE.
Well, I didn't say that directly. It was like we were chatting.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, I bet my license O.J. Simpson has CTE. And the journalist ran with it. Because in public, I can't make comments on specific patients.
Right.
But I can comment.
Because you can't confirm this until a player's dead.
Yes. And I can comment on groups of individuals. Okay. So in reference to O.J. Simpson, O.J. Simpson played American football for so many years.
Yeah.
So just like Mike Webster, he received thousands of blows to his head. So knowing what we know, as a member of a high-risk cohort, I believe there's a 100% probability that he had some degree of brain damage, some type, with or without CTE.
Because you said earlier, some of the marking symptoms are aggressiveness, violence, forgetfulness.
Yes.
Loss of details, a disassociation even?
Yes.
Yes. Fascinating.
And parents, let me share a story with you. There was a pastor that sent me an email. His son was playing football in college. And over the years, he saw his son deteriorate. And he thought it was just an arrogant young man who was doing well in sports. Until he began to manifest very violent tendencies. And then he did not want to go to school anymore because he said he wasn't remembering things in class.
Oh, wow.
Then he saw the movie Concussion and called me and was weeping on the phone. But that was why I wrote my book. I get hundreds of emails from parents. After the fact, I wish I knew.
So now you're trying to inform them ahead of the fact. Now, in the book you say this CTE work and acquainting people about it is not a crusade.
It's not.
But it seems it is a crusade for you, isn't it?
It's not. I would rather use the word
or a personal mission.
I think it's a calling.
Okay.
I was with Pat Robertson earlier today. Each and every one of us has a calling. For example, when Angel Gabriel came to Mother Mary, Mary got so confused. Like, what are you talking about? I do not know any man.
Right.
And the angel said, no, the Holy Spirit will come upon you. And what did she say? Which is one of the most powerful prayers. Be it done to me according to thy word. For I'm a lonely handmaid of yours. So who am I? I did not look for this. I was doing my work as a no-name Nigerian doctor, like the NFL calls me, on a cold Saturday morning in a dilapidated autopsy room in the Allegheny Mountains of Pennsylvania. I was doing innocent work, and this came to me. And when you look back, as a Christian, nothing happens by chance. The Lord God Almighty sees further down the road than we do. It's not a crusade for me. It's not a mission. It's simply, I want to be seen as a man who is spreading the word of God, who is being a Christian in the daily activities of his life. That is all I do.
Dr. BENNET OMALU, thank you for being here and for the book. It's called Truth Doesn't Have a Side, My Alarming Discovery About the Danger of Contact Sports. It's available now at bookstores everywhere and online. When the world over returns, many of us, including myself, will be soon sending our kids off to college for the first time. Educational consultant Daniel RISEMAN is here with tips to help us make a successful transition, both for parents and the kids. Stay right there. Welcome back to The World Over. August is here, and many have kids going off to college for the first time. But every year, parents make unwitting mistakes that can set their kids back. My next guest is a teacher and founder of RISEMAN Educational Consulting in New York and a regular contributor to LifeZette on education. Here to give us some tips for making that transition to college a good one is Daniel RISEMAN. Thank you for joining us. He joins us via satellite. I want to start with what we're learning from studies. They show that 35% of freshmen drop out, more than half during the first 6 weeks of college. Why are those first 6 weeks so critical?
Well, what happens in those first 6 weeks is the kids are no longer in their comfort zone. Without their comfort zone, they don't know where to turn. And what they do is they try to find any connections they can. They go to the virtual world. And the virtual world is very superficial, so there's nothing there they can really connect to. They haven't developed the routines, they don't know where to go, and they feel homesick. And with all those pieces working together, it basically adds up to a disaster of wanting to drop out and wanting to go home as soon as possible. And that's not good for the parents, it's not good for the kid, and financially, it's a disaster.
Now, you go through a list of what parents should and should not do when they bring their freshmen to college. I want to touch on a few of those. First of all, you say you should help them move into the dorm, but then you should get out. Why? And why, is this one of the big mistakes parents make?
Right. You want your child to be as independent as he or she can be, and you want to develop that from day one, literally hour one. You want that kid to basically be responsible for his or her boxes, set up the room the way he or she wishes to do so, and also start interacting with people in the hallway, people, maybe the RA, everyone in that dorm. Let that kid develop relationships on his or her own. The parent should not be involved with that, because once you start doing that, the highlight of that, the kid needs to be, independent, needs to individuate. And if you're around, the kid cannot spread his or her wings, and you just restrict his or her growth.
You also say you should not call that first night to see how things are going, nor should you visit campus until parents' weekend. Why not?
Right. You should let your child be on his or her own to see what that child can do by him or herself. You do not want to interfere. There will be growing pains. The child will probably text and say, I'm having a tough time. The roommate is being rude. But the child has to deal with that rudeness on his or her own. You can't, interfere. The more we interfere as parents, the less that child will be able to enjoy the college experience and become that mature adult that we want that child to be. The more interference, the worse it gets for us as parents and for the child as well.
What's the biggest and most common mistake you see parents making during this transition overall? And I know you consult with a lot of families.
Sure. What parents tend to do is they tend to be too hands-on. They look at college as their own experience. They've worked so hard for that child to get into college that they forget that it's not their experience, it's the kid's experience. So what happens is parents go up to college too soon. They take the kids out to eat, maybe a couple guys in the dorm, and they monopolize the conversation. They pretend or think that it's their experience, that it's their college years, but it's not. And that, to me, is the number one issue I find with most parents, is basically taking ownership of the college experience and not allowing that son or daughter to really feel and organically develop, their own college years.
I need to ask you, Daniel, what would be your advice to the student about to embark on this new adventure? And let's face it, for a lot of kids, it's the first time they've been away from home ever, the first time they've been, in many cases, many states removed from their parents. Your advice to them?
My advice to them is be patient. Don't expect friends to evolve overnight. Be smart. Don't go to parties and be crazy. Don't engage in binge drinking. Don't let your inhibitions go when you don't even know your surroundings. You don't know who you can trust. But give it time. Look at people, have discussions, maybe stay away from the virtual world a little bit more, more Facebook and Twitter, cut down on that so you can engage with people. Engage with your dorm mates, engage with the people around you, your classmates. Engage with your professor, go to office hours. Just really try to develop a nice, cohesive environment, but don't force the issue. Don't force a relationship. Don't force going to a party that you don't feel comfortable going to. Trust your instincts, but don't do anything silly, because that can be very dangerous.
You suggest that kids not take more than 12 credits that first semester. Why not?
Well, what happens is I've seen a lot of kids want to really just, bang out all their prerequisites and all the intro courses. They want to get it done immediately. But in doing so, you miss out on maybe joining a club, maybe a faith-based organization, maybe you want to do intramurals. You restrict yourself. So instead of taking, let's say, some kids, which I recommend 12, they take 18 credit hours. Now they're all restricted to their classes. They can't evolve and see what's out there. And what they're doing is they're just seeing the library, seeing their classes, but they're not able to see beyond that. Also, they're not able to develop a routine, for example, going to the gym, doing things that they need to do because they're so restricted with the courses they are taking.
Now, you tutor kids and you prepare them for college. Public Agenda Research Group recently noted that the number 2 reason kids drop out of college is they're just not ready academically. 60% of freshmen take remedial courses. Are you finding that in your work, and what can be done?
Well, a lot of kids cannot write. A lot of kids cannot express themselves. Some kids struggle with math, but I find most kids really struggle to write. And what happens is a lot of parents have hired tutors to try to make up for that, that lack of ability. Or they themselves, the parents, take that on them, to write for their kids. What I find is a kid who's not ready in that sense should take remedial writing in college, can evolve their skill set, and can be a very successful college student. But high schools, they need to do more with the writing curriculum. They need to have more in-class writing. But remember this, teaching English is one of the most time-consuming professions there is in the high school. It takes a lot to teach English, and it's asking a lot from the English teachers to grade and do much more than their peers. So it's a double-edged sword. Kids are not great at writing, but the teachers aren't having the time to make them good.
They're also not great at reading, which is why I'm always stressing literacy. Because if you read well, you can usually write well because it shapes the mind. How much do you attribute this to smartphones and the use of smartphones, not only in daily life, but in courtship, to understand anything? They don't have to recall a fact because you can look it up on the cell phone. How has this reprogrammed students over, let's say, the last decade? And have you seen a diminishment in attention spans and even in basic human interaction in your work?
Oh, absolutely. I think what the smartphone does, it has fragmented everything, fragmented their ability to think deeply, think for a long duration. It's fragmented relationships. I was thinking this on the way in. Relationships have become extremely superficial because it's very binary. You're either going to be liked on Facebook or someone will ignore you. And everyone's just basically going for that like. It's that dopamine fix that they get from that like. But in the same sense, they can't even read a long poem. They can't read the Iliad. They're always going to Cliff's Notes or Spark Notes. I mean, I'm not saying everyone, but the majority of students really struggle to read anything that makes them focus or wants them to focus for a long period of time. That focus is gone, and I find a huge amount of my students are ADD, ADHD, they have that, they're taking medication, which helps them, but then you have to ask yourself, what are the consequences of that medication down the road? There might be, I think there must be a fix that would be more, generic, more organic than just taking medication for this condition that's been set up by the smartphone.
It's amazing. I always tell people, those who read books will rule the future. So, learn to focus your mind so you not only take in new knowledge, but discipline yourself into the practice. What should parents do, my final question, Daniel, to prepare their kids for this experience before they leave, practically speaking?
Well, what parents need to do, from day one, parents, once that kid is born into the world, a lot of parents set up a 529 fund. But at the same notion, we don't think about the emotional fund, so to speak, for that child. We need to emotionally develop as best as we can kids that are resilient, kids that have grit. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is let them experience failure. If they're benched on a basketball team, let the parent not call in and let the kid figure out his or her own issue. Kids need to fight for themselves, and we as parents need to allow them to do so. The more we interfere, the less likely they're going to excel in college. So as parents, we need to let our kids, it sounds weird, but we need to let our kids fail, and we need to stop that participatory trophies and awards. We need to let our kids know that once you reach and overcome an obstacle, that is a reward in itself, and the kid can feel it intrinsically. And once that kid has that in his or her gut, you're going to see success. You're going to see these numbers of kids stay in college and graduate. Now it's almost 5 to 6 years to graduate. You're going to see kids graduate in 4 years and hopefully excel in life.
Daniel Reisman, thank you for the advice. You can read all of Daniel Reisman's columns on education at lifezet.com. And you can do what we've been doing over the last few days. We're taking our first off to college. You have to teach them how to wash clothes. You have to teach them how to balance checkbooks. These are life lessons they need to prepare themselves for this transition to independent life. That's what it's all about. And hopefully giving them the values and the faith they've been given all along to help continue in that walk as well. That's all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter. The links are RaymondArroyo.com. Be sure to join us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.